It's really cool to be a multifaceted babe.
Yeah, you could put it like that.
Yeah.
I think maybe like nerd is a bit more of a fitting word, but multifaceted babe feels a bit more like Gen Z. I like that.
Hi guys, it's Kyan from NME and I'm in conversation with Lava LaRue.
Hey.
How have you been?
I've been good, yeah, I've been all right. I'm really happy that the weather is getting better and it's nearly summer. We're getting closer to summer, which is great, yeah.
Yeah. What have you been picking up lately? Like any hobbies, any stuff you've been doing to, fill in the time?
I feel like everything that I do is a hobby. Like, I mean, yeah, I know that, I don't know, yeah, how that sounds, but like in terms of everything that I create, I'm generally like really passionate about it. So I do like an equal amount of the visual sides as I do the music side to things. So I think like when I get sick of like working on a song or like I get writer's block, I'll start like doing the graphic design for the cover art or like start putting together a treatment for like the music video or a music video for a friend or whatever. And then by the time I'm sort of like over that, I'll go back to like the music and I'm ready. Do you know what I mean? So it's like a constant cycle of like hobbies that all like inform each other. So there's been like a lot of like that, a lot of like making visuals, a lot of doing cover art and then going back to the music.
Yeah. It's really cool to be a multifaceted babe.
Yeah, you could put it like that.
Yeah.
I think maybe like nerd is a bit more of a fitting word, but multifaceted babe feels a bit more like Gen Z. I like that.
I was really excited to do this interview because, West London babe to another West London
Oh, you're
babe.
from West London?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. What part of West are you from?
Well, Hounslow.
Yeah, Hounslow counts. Yeah, my brother lives near Hounslow.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, I'm more like West Central. But no, I rate any part of West. That's gang.
How do you feel about the new influx of West London talent?
It's great. I think I'm really happy for it. Yeah, naturally when someone comes out of West, like I'm instantly like supporting it. I've been loving everything Drea's been doing, Sench has been doing. And there's like, yeah, loads of other incredible artists making like, there's another artist called Finn Foxall who's just put out some music and like, yeah, I think West Londoners, there's a different sound and a vibe. Like when you go there, obviously the energy is different from South, it is different from East. And so that influence on music and seeing it make its way into like, yeah, like mainstream music culture has been like really great, just seeing people who are from areas that you grew up in. But also West has always had a huge, rich like musical heritage, from like Carnival and the foundation of Carnival to like a lot of the punk bands that like originated or were influenced by West. Like The Clash have a whole album called The West Way, and the Sex Pistols used to spend a lot of time in like Notting Hill and Ladbroke Grove, and that would become like the pioneering sound of alternative punk music basically. So there's like different aspects to it that like West's heritage is like super rich in. So it's cool seeing that kind of get recognized again. Yeah, it's cool. I like it.
Yeah. So talking about like you mentioned the punk bands and like the foundation of alternative music, I feel like your new music is a little bit more on that sort of side. Like your previous have been like more organic sounds, more instrumental sounds. And I wondered what influenced you to do that. Why do you want to like get into more like alternative sounds compared to like the internet-y pop rap type things most people might know you for?
Yeah, no, it's a really, really good question. I think it's funny because it's less so a shift of me like changing sound, but actually me going back to like a lot of my influence of what I was listening to growing up anyway. Because before I was Lava LaRue as an artist, I was playing in like loads of bands, and like the people who I started like making music with, which is like an arts collective I run called 9A, like when we started, these were people who were in like thrash metal bands or like skaters who would like equally listen to sort of like hip hop as they would listen to sort of like, pop punk. And so we always sort of like had that fusion. And the first ever show that I played as Lava LaRue, it was in support for like a bunch of actual like alternative, like heavier bands. But that world of like hip hop and alternative, in my opinion, always went well together, because a lot of people who I know, yeah, they'll be listening to sort of like both. But I think when I started lava, because of the resources that I had at that time, it was a lot easier to like go on like a hip hop beat or like a bedroom type sort of like alternative R&B beat, because all I had was, you know, a sampler in front of me or like my computer. So, and then in terms of playing shows, like it's kind of a logistical thing. Like, you know, at that time, what I had access to, like I just had like a DJ and I'd be like, have me and my mic. But as my career's gone on, I've had a bit more access to resources to actually be able to play with a band and make it sound good. Because before I always wanted to play with a band and like make that type of music, but when you don't have resources and the sound to make it sound good, you know, it comes out very DIY and it's a lot harder, and you know, you can't actually sustain that. Do you know what I mean? And also to like have rehearsal time and pay everyone for all of those kind of things. So like, as I kind of went forward as an artist, I was always like writing songs on guitar first. A lot of songs that were on my more R&B type like projects, I had actually written them like on guitar. They had a bit more of like that sound, and we'll go and we'll flip it and we'll turn it into sort of like a bit more of like, yeah, like a hip hop vibe. But yeah, I was like, I actually have, you know, people around me now where I feel a bit more like a musician when I'm on stage and I have my guitar, and that's where my heart's always been at, and those are always the shows I've gone to and like a lot of the friends that I've had. So yeah, I think like, yeah, now I've just been able to really like, instead of making a beat, I've been able to actually like write songs on instruments and then bring that musicality, and I find that process a lot more rewarding now. However, there's something to be said, I think, of a wider conversation of alternative music and indie music being shifted in a space of more like POC and Black people like approaching that music. And I think growing up when I was in school, I was weird because I listened to like bands like Paramore and Bring Me the Horizon and You Me at 6 and like, or just like loads of indie bands, because as a Caribbean, people are like, oh, but that's white people music. And I was always like, no. Like, look at the first rock stars, whether it was Jimi Hendrix or Chuck Berry, whatever. These were all, you know, Black folk. Prince. Do you know what I mean? Like these rock star icons were always like Black people. But at that time in the 2000s, it was just like quite a white dominated scene. Whereas now, you know, you've got more of that shift where we're seeing a lot more, you know, like POC people approach alternative and heavy music and have like an alternative look and listen to bands, and like through internet culture, whatever, that's like spread more. So those conversations of me making that shift has been like easier to have now. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, it's like a mixture of the both. That was a long answer, but yeah, that's the truth.
That's why it makes more sense why when this comes out, your next single should be out. So that's called Don't Come Back. Makes sense why that sounds a bit scarry. I feel like ska is very, as you said, very ingrained in West London. I feel like if I hear ska, I always think of West London and Carnival.
100%. But you got to understand, like, West had one of the biggest sort of like migration of like Caribbeans settling there. And what you had was like the Caribbean migrants and white working class locals were living like next to each other, and the white British working class locals had their punk energy and the Caribbeans had their like reggae energy. And when their kids started sort of like making music together, that's how you had that like punk reggae fusion that makes like ska, and it is sort of like alternative music but with a clear Caribbean sort of like influence. And if you listen to the foundations of like a lot of punk music like The Clash, that is a huge aspect of like their whole identity. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
Being half Latvian and half Jamaican is almost like ingrained in your heritage, that type of, you know, fusion. And I feel like that's why you probably gravitate to it a lot. But yeah, that's just me making a comment. You don't have to.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, there's definitely dualities of like, my mixed heritage where you get elements of both of that heritage in my music. But I think my whole thing, and I was talking about this in the journey here, this Gemini thing where it's like the dualities of being like maybe potentially things that people would see as contradicting things at once. So, you know, I can be hyper masculine and hyper feminine at the same time. I can, you know, embrace my sort of like Caribbean culture and be really proud of like my Jamaican heritage, but be like a punk rock Brit at the same time. And, you know, these things do not have to cancel each other out. It's not like you have to be one or the other. I think the whole purpose of my music is where can that come in and fuse and make something that essentially you get progression. I don't believe in terms of music everything's been done before. You know, I believe that there's loads of different influences and you put that together, you create new colors and sounds, and that is like my essential goal for future projects.
With your next EP, talking about future projects called Hi-Fidelity, you really want to go into what it means to make a queer anthem. And I wanted to hear from your words. What do you consider a queer anthem?
A queer anthem is any song that has like a queer narrative that people feel like it speaks to them. Do you know what I mean? And historically, a lot of songs that are considered queer anthems weren't necessarily actually even made by queer people. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm coming out, I want the world to know. Do you know what I mean? Like songs like that, but it was, people say that was actually written for the gays, but it's something where it's like, this speaks to me and it gives me a sense of pride, do you know what I mean, of who I am. But there is, definitely something to be said that a lot of like queer icons weren't necessarily like quote unquote queer people. I mean, you don't necessarily know the ins and outs, but I'm talking about like the Britneys and the Madonnas and like stuff like that. And so like a lot of queer people had to reclaim maybe songs that people would be like, well, that's a straight narrative, but they reclaimed it for themselves. And that's because, one, like the lack of queer representation in like the mainstream music, even though a lot of the greatest musicians of all time were queer, were secretly queer, but maybe were afraid to go down that narrative too much because they wanted their music to be respected on the whole spectrum, period, rather than just boxed in as like, oh, well, you're a queer person, so we're only ever going to sell your music to a queer demographic. And I think a lot of artists are afraid of that, of like, oh, well, now that I'm a queer person, I'm only ever going to be on the queer music algorithm, which means I'm not going to be able to, go as far as being maybe a top 10 artist because it's just going to be seen as like niche queer music to be played in clubs. And then, and a lot of people see that world as either maybe the intersection of like the queer fashion world and music. So, there's like something about sort of like the PC music world or the hyperpop world where it's very queer centric, which like I love. But then there also needs to be a lot of like queer representation across like indie and psychedelic rock and hip hop and R&B. And there are so many incredible artists. But I think pushing that narrative is what's going to help create more queer anthems, essentially.
Yeah, because when you spoke to us last year, you said that being queer is inherently political. Yeah, and I was wondering, you are quite political, but you're also quite young. Do you feel like it's very important to at least be, kind of into politics as well?
Yeah, I do think there's something important to be said about like the involvement of youth in politics. Obviously, the time that we're living in right now, we're in a pandemic. There's politics and war and like international situations are sort of like bubbling up, and that does affect your life as a young person because naturally you're going to have the anxiety of like, well, what kind of world am I going to be living in, and what kind of world has this older generation left for me climate wise? Do you know what I mean? Sort of like in terms of identity and equality wise and how we must live. I don't think that's a new concept. I think the youth of every generation, every subcultural movement has a political ideology, whether it was like the free love movement, hippies, or, ravers, or, Rastafarians, like all of these like subgroups of people have their ideologies and their political beliefs, and a lot of it comes from an anti-establishment aspect. I think what's interesting now is that older generations do feel like they live in a hyper political world of maybe like PC culture or woke culture or infographics, and a lot of young people are like sharing a lot of information. We have more access to information than we ever had, therefore it polarizes politics, where it's like, okay, so if you believe in this thing, this is how you must dress and this is what this kind of person looks at. And if you as much as wearing one thing, or maybe you wear a red hat, or you don't like to wear masks, or you do whatever, all these things, it has basically created a catalyst of what political identities look like. And and then instantly you look at someone and how they dress and you're like, oh, you must believe in this, or you must think like this, or whatever. And it's interesting seeing that, because I feel like whilst I think it's been really amazing having access to more information and like everybody being like seeming like the youth today are super political as people, I do think that when I look at young people in the past, because they didn't have the internet, they were going to protest all the time, and that was in the youth culture. Like that's what you did. If you were like a young anarchist or whatever, or a young social whatever, you would actually create like little groups where you would go to someone's house and you'd like, you know, bake some cupcakes or whatever, or flapjacks, and you'd sit around and read a manifesto together or write a manifesto together. And that was like, you would create these political parties. And, you know, if we're talking about the times of like Angela Davis, what made a political activist was someone who went and did talks at universities, were part of like a group, and literally created and like worked their way sort of like to the top, and had the like education, or maybe, you know, went through some kind of thing that rallied like a support of people. Whereas now you can kind of like have an infographic that goes viral and then get signed and have a published book of like how you should or shouldn't, and you at the age of like 17, do you know what I mean? And so whilst I do believe I'm a political person, I think I'm just a product of the time I'm living in, the fact that I am queer, that I am a person of colour, that I do come from a migrant family. Yes, naturally, because of this climate, I am going to be political because I'm just talking about my experience. But when people are like, oh yeah, you make political music, or like you're an activist, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm fighting for what I believe in. But in my opinion, what makes an activist is like the people I look up to, like, you know, the Angela Davises of the world. And yeah, long answers, I guess, sorry.
It's all right. And you do it through TikTok quite a bit. I remember seeing you denouncing a bill that stopped freedom of movement in the UK on TikTok, and I was like, this, like, I could actually digest it that way. I feel like TikTok's going to become kind of more revolutionary than what many people might think right now.
Yeah, I think it always has been. There's always been, like, you know, at least for the past 2 years, there's always been people sharing and spreading information and actually being like, and here are the resources, you can go off TikTok to find it. That's always been a thing. It's just the algorithm that you find, really. And so when people are like, oh, I thought TikTok was just dancing videos, it's like, yeah, there's a lot of that too, but it's just the more people that come on TikTok, the more of different algorithms and different pockets of people. And yeah, that's what you'll find, basically. Yeah.
I really want to get and see what I can pick about the new EP. Hi-Fidelity. What made you think of the name Hi-Fidelity? What does that mean to you?
Well, it's a bit of a double entendre. It's a bit of a play on words, isn't it? And there is like a book called Hi-Fidelity, and then they made it into a film, and then they did a remake of it, which is like a TV series with Zoe Kravitz in it. That was actually unrelated, although that is a good series. But yeah, it's a play on words because high fidelity is like a music terminology. It's like hi-fi, lo-fi. I started making lo-fi music. I started making lo-fi beats, and that was that, like, now this project is like a shift in my sound. Sort of like big guitars, and I want to play it with a band and like high fidelity music, whereas before I was making like lo-fi beats in a bedroom. Do you know what I mean? So this is that shift. This is supposed to represent that. But there's a lot of sexy songs on it and a lot of queer songs, and then it makes me think of like infidelity, high fidelity. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like, yeah, it's a play on words, basically. Yeah.
And do you have any like cool stories from making the EP? Anything you can tell us?
Yeah, I have a lot of cool stories. There's like, so one of the lead singles of the EP, which is also called High Fidelity, I made in LA just before the pandemic started. So, but it was like the week basically that like they were about to close the border. I was supposed to go there and like make a project, and then suddenly we're like, and like when I first went there, it's like, oh, there's this like coronavirus thing happening, like, you know, and like I was like, I posted a picture of me in like an airport, and I had decided at that point it wasn't mandatory to wear a mask, but I had decided like, oh, I don't know what I'll go on for this, so I'm not sure what kind of disease it is or what the situation is or whatever, so I had put one on, but I used to wear one anyway, just like almost as like a fashion thing, and loads of people were like, oh, you don't even need some, like that's not even a thing, like don't worry about it. And then literally like, yeah, like 2 weeks later I'm back in London, and then like everything's closed or whatever. So that was really funny, making that in that climate where suddenly like it was the week that the world changed, basically. And I was just on a vibe, like making like summery music, like and then yeah, a lot of the other songs, yeah, I think I have just started to look into the musicality and work with incredible musicians on Don't Come Back. The bass line was written by Saya Gray, who's an incredible artist, used to be Daniel Caesar's bassist. She's been dropping amazing music that everyone should definitely listen to. Really sonically progressive, incredible vocals, but just being able to work with musicians who are like musicians has really made me want to up my game. And like, you know, I've always had a love for like guitar and keys and bass, but like the pandemic allowed me to have some time to really hone in on that and like, you know, write songs in that manner. So yeah, there's like a lot of the songs on that has been sort of like me sitting down, locked in my bedroom over lockdown, like being like, okay, I want to be able to like play something that I would love to play to a festival crowd and sing my heart out about this kind of like situation. That was that, yeah.
Yeah. And talking about being with really cool, like working with really cool artists, you've directed Wet Legs video.
Yeah, I have. Yeah, that was really fun.
Yeah, going back to multifaceted babe at the top.
Yeah.
Yeah, how was it like being a director?
It's been really fun,
something else.
yeah, because I directed the Wet Leg video amongst like wrapping up the Hi-Fidelity project, and it was cool. I felt like I was living a double life because like, yeah, by like daytime I'd be in these like color grade sessions, or like even before that speaking to sort of like the director of photography or like the set designer, and then like by nighttime I'll be in like the studio wrapping up the mixes of songs. And I love it. Again, it's like going back to like having different hobbies and them informing each other. Like I'd be like, you know, working on the music and listening to the mixes of like my music over and over again, and then I'll be able to go home and then work on the edit of like the Wet Leg video. And it was just really great because I would kind of like refresh my mind, and it was like constantly creative and like creating this sort of like universe basically, whether it's like visually for myself or for other people. And like worked on some sound design for that. So fun. It's just been really fun overall. I think the thing with being a director is that I only, because it's not my main bread and butter like music is, I only really work on like songs that I really love, or you know, with artists that I'm really passionate about, because I don't have to do it. And so, but it's an amazing thing because it means like every step along the way I'm doing stuff, and I'm pulling together teams that I've always wanted to work with. The team that I worked with for that specific video was the dream team. Like, yeah, super female dominated film crew, which is like quite a rare thing when you get into film. And yeah, just like the producers, boss ladies, the DOP boss lady, the set design Rania, like Egyptian queen who I met when I was literally 17 and now does like mad sort of like set design, and just like everyone smashed it. And so the energy on set was just like vibes. Yeah, it was really nice. I loved it. I love it. I love directing. I'm so passionate. It's like literally people will go home and watch reality TV, and I'll go home and like think about music video concepts and like draw out like the sort of like the storyboards and sort of like do the graphics for the title text. I love it. I literally love it. Yeah.
Remind me, when I was younger, I used to think I could be a director. I used to think of like all of it, but I was never as passionate as you. Go write the whole storyboard out.
I love it. I feel like if you're the kind of person where you'll listen to a song and you'll be looking at the chords and you're just like imagining visuals or whatever, just all it is having the language and knowing sort of like, okay, how can I make that a reality? Because I remember the day that I thought of the concept for that Wet Leg video, and I was in the Isle of Wight with the band, and I heard the song of their like album, and I was listening to the whole album, and suddenly I was like, okay, imagine this is happening and you guys are in this environment, and then someone walks in and you guys have this dialogue and then boom, and then the song starts and and I was like, I need to write this down. And then I was like, okay, and then they're like, yeah, cool, let's do it. And then we did it. Yeah, and like a lot of my music videos, I work with other people, it's like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess like lately, loads of people have been talking about world builders and how if you want to be really successful, you've got to be a world builder. But it must be even harder to be a world builder for other people as well.
Yeah, no, but the thing is, for me, it's not, I don't think it's hard. I think it's just having the energy to sort of like go through with it. And then, yeah, like knowing people who like going into directing, I didn't necessarily know a huge amount about camera equipment. But then having like a director of photography, Elsa, this like incredible woman who like, I was like, okay, I'm imagining this vibe. And she would just be like, okay, well then we're going to need this camera and we're going to need this thing and da-da-da-da. And then, yeah, like, Obviously, I've made things like a lot of the music videos I've directed before has been like very DIY with like zero resources, and it's been sort of like a lot of collaging and just filming it off small cameras. Being able to work with Wet Leg and like have the resources, so like we can make that happen is like wicked, because then you can like expand on that world. But when I started, it was always like very DIY, and I had all these great ideas, but I was like, imagine if I was to make this but like a movie. Do you know what I mean? So now being at a stage where I can actually make that into a movie has been the best thing ever. Yeah.
It's always nice to make a movie with some friends. I want to talk about 9/8. Like, do you like my segue?
That's a good segue, yeah.
How is it like, finding your collective? How is it like all of you guys starting to bubble up together, but all for your own respected crafts instead of just being a part of a group or backtracking off of one person's success?
Yeah, I mean, a collective is very different because, we're not a boy band. And so we all, like, there's no conversation of like, oh, what if one of you goes solo? Because it's like, no, we were all solo to begin with. And when we come together, it's a link up. Like, we're a collective, but first and foremost, we're a group of friends. And I think like it's funny talking about the collective because it's like, a lot of us like met at school or at parties or whatever. And when people are like, so how did you form and how do you create a collective? I'm like, well, when you have a group of friends, I'm not like, so how did you guys all form? It's like everyone knows it like happens naturally and through just conversation and meeting people. And then suddenly you have like a circle of people who you really love and trust. And with 9/8, it's sort of like, I always say this, and I've probably said this in like 100 other interviews before, but it is a bit like the Avengers because there's a like each superhero has their own individual origin story, and the audience will have each hero whom they maybe relate to and the one that they like, more. Some people are more of an Iron Man type person, some people's more of a Black Widow. But when it comes together, it's like, and here's the big superhero movie together. And that's when we do group mixtapes or group projects. It's like everyone has incredible solo projects, but when we come together, it's like it's this whole new thing, it's a whole new narrative, and it makes you make something that is totally out of your comfort zone. For me, I think I've definitely moved a bit away from like maybe a lot of the sort of like bar and like hip hop or trap that I used to like start off with in SoundCloud. With Lava LaRue, it's a lot more sort of like musicality and like guitar-based music. But with 9/8, I can always hop on that stuff again. So it means that if people miss that music for me, they can always listen to a 9/8 track if they want to hear me bar. Do you know what I mean? So that freedom, it allows that freedom for everyone's individual projects. Yeah.
You're some of the coolest people. I've got to say that. Yeah. I saw you guys had a New Year's party. I was like, very cool.
Yeah, we love a good party. We love throwing parties.
So I feel like on the because you have a new EP coming out, the first track is Festoon Boxes. Why did you choose that to be the first single, and what is this single meant to do for you? What is it meant to say about you?
Yeah, so Festoon Boxes was the first single that I kind of released that's part of this like sort of universe. It isn't necessarily like completely part of the Hi-Fidelity world, but what it was just me opening up this conversation of this shift of like, this is the kind of sound I'm on right now, and this is actually not a new Lava sound. This is the old Lava sound. This is what I was making before I was Lava, and I was like, on my indie pop wave. And again, it was a solidified, certified sort of like queer anthem. That was Festoon Boxes, was something that like when me and all my fellow lesers are going to the gay club, and we've got our boxers showing out the bands of our jeans, and we've got sort of like a ribbed vest tank top on, and it's so the galley know. So the galley know what's up, basically. And I wanted to make a little tune that was just an homage to that. And it's really fun and playful and great riffs, and it's working with like just incredible people who I've been able to work with across the project. Saya Gray again, who did the bass line for that, and Courage, who like done previous tracks like Magpie, and the homies.
I wanted to talk a bit about the future. What's the future like going to be for you? Do you have any like really big goals?
I think, again, talking about, when I was talking about like the visuals of the sound, doing that, but just on wider scales and like world building. I think I pay a lot of attention to detail in the universe that I create, from the clothes that I make to the visuals that I do for myself or other people, to elements of the song, a lot of elements of the details, and that it relates to other things. even in sort of like the videos or that video that I directed for Wet Leg, you know, every character is wearing like maybe an element of like Lava Land clothing in it, and each little detail from like products on the shelves or like, you know, they all relate to something else within the wider sort of like Lava Land universe, or foreshadow something that's going to happen later on in the video. Like nothing there is by mistake. There's even a newspaper in an element, and if you pause it and read the newspaper, like we wrote that, do you know what I mean? Like it wasn't just like, it's not random, nothing's random, do you know what I mean? And so like all of these things are little clues and hints of things that are to come basically later on. And I've always loved the idea of sort of like creating that world, that Lava Land. So yeah, making a lot more sort of like clothes, which has been really fun. And I want, if you want to immerse yourself in Lava Land, there should be the clothes you can wear, the sound you can hear, the visuals you can see. Yeah, maybe I'll release some food, and there can be like, a hot sauce or something, and there could be the food you can taste. I want the full shebang, really. I love that. I really love that. It's really fun.
And what type of legacy do you want to leave behind?
It's funny because I suppose like, obviously I want to make a positive impact on this world, but for me it's less about sort of like, this is the legacy, this is how I want people to remember me or whatever. Like I need to be an icon, and I need everyone to like remember me. It's like, in everything that I do, I grow as a person. I'm like, through the work I do, what is the impact I want the world to have on me and making me a better person? Less more about, see what I mean? It's sort of like, maybe that's a selfish thing to say, but actually it's less about, you know, when I do this stuff, when I do music, when I make a project, like I'm trying to make something better than the last one, not for anything else, but because I want to make music that I really am proud to listen to. And I feel like for the first time, I'm actually doing that now. Like up until the last project, I had never released a body of work that I feel like I liked the music and I thought it was good music, but I wanted to create something that I knew my 15-year-old self would be proud of. Do you know what I mean? And that is kind of what I'm trying to achieve. When I would discover certain artists, you know, like Prince or Bjork or Erykah Badu, and I would just listen to the world and the universe they'd create and the lyricism, whatever. I'm like, I'm trying to reach that mode, really. And if 10 years from now people listen to that and that makes an impact on them, or that can help progress some kind of conversation, that's a bonus. But I'm just trying to make my experience on this planet and the experience of the people around me and the people I love and the things I care about a good experience. Yeah.
Well, that was a beautiful ending to a beautiful interview.
Thank you for having me.